Welcome, everybody. Hope people are taking their lunch and going to take some time and jump on today with me here from Intelligent Construction Opportunities. I'm Stephanie Brown. I have over 15 years experience working in the technology and learning and development space. I founded Intelligent Construction Opportunities specifically because I wanted to bridge the gap between construction professionals and the technology that they're using and think they should be using. We source and select and implement technology for you. And there's a lot of choices out there these days and a lot of misconceptions floating around about it all. So that leads me to intro our guest today, who I'm really pleased to have, Kippi Ivey. He is a senior business development manager with Faro Technologies, one of the biggest laser scanner companies out there, doing many things in many sectors, even aside from construction. Welcome, Kip.
Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm good. I'm great. Maybe you can talk a little bit about yourself and what are you up to these days? And I also, what I love when you and I have our conversations is the background you come with, and knowing you now as I do, you change it up. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
I do change it up on purpose, simply for the sole fact is I do a lot of these type events, and of course, in the post-COVID world that we live in today, we, even internally within our own internal organizations, we're finding ourselves interacting in a 2D world more than we do a 3D world.
Sure,
and
yeah.
so, that's kind of stupid to say that when you work for a company that focuses on the world of 3D, that 90% of what we meet internally is in a 2D space. I find myself wanting to change my background, number one, to see who notices, and that kind of thing, and to bring, something a little bit different, to the interaction kind of function. But you're right. I am the senior business development manager here at Faro. I've been in the construction space for a long time. I served my apprenticeship almost 40 years ago. Studied computer science when it was still done on punch cards, and as you and I talked before, I left college.
Punch card. What's a punch card, kid?
Yeah, exactly, right. A really big index card and with a bunch of holes in it, and then you waited 3 days to see whether or not the stack of cards that was this tall ran and actually created something usable, or if it was just you forgot a comma and the whole thing failed. After I left college for about a year and traveled the world as a dancer for a year, gave up my college football career, and then my dad said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "I'll go back to school." And he said, "Come drive truck." Next thing I know, I'm in the apprenticeship program, and that started my path in construction. But probably 25 years ago, I took another leap of faith, and went to work for a small software company called QuickPen, and that started my path in construction. And I've been in this side of construction ever since. Been in the world of excuse me.
Can you tell us a little bit about QuickPen and what it's evolved to? I think that would be helpful. And I just want to take a minute here and welcome Shelley Amato. She has several comments here about how technology is playing out for us. It won't solve the problem. Data must be organized, protected, and delivered with one click. One click, I think, is very, very hopeful. But I do see that being.
The interesting thing, it reminds me, we started talking about the QuickPen function, which, QuickPen was a computerized estimating application that was started way back in the early 80s, late 70s, and was one of the very first digitized estimating softwares in the world that allowed somebody to literally, just by touching, at that time, full blueprints on a drafting board size table, you could touch locations and we could capture the XY position, and take off lengths electronically, rather than having to use an architectural scale rule or whatever the case may be. And it revolutionized how people estimate. But my dad used to tell me all the time, he used to say, Kip, greatest computer program in the world doesn't matter if you don't know what you're doing. And the same thing exists in the world of technology, right? No project management tool, a project software, management software, is ever going to make you an amazing project manager if you don't know how to be a project
manager. Yeah, for sure.
And and I think that's probably one of the greatest myths of technology and construction anywhere, that there is a quote magic button, right? Knowledge, the human intellect, our ability to see and examine things, and then impart that knowledge into an inanimate object such as a computer, and to ensure that it's not just garbage in, garbage out. Is probably one of the greatest interactions that is going to ensure your success. The person using that keyboard needs to understand the industry. If they don't, it's not going to turn them into an amazing project manager. It's not going to turn them into an amazing draftsman. It's that I remember years ago, and I think I said this in our very first podcast that we did, that in the early days of BIM, right? Drawing in 3D before BIM was even an acronym. We were drawing in 3D at QuickPen, and guys used to ask me all the time. He said, "Kip, where do I find a good draftsman?" I'd say, "Go look in your shop, because It's going to be easier to teach drafting to a tradesman than it'll ever be to teach the trade to a draftsman." And there's nothing worse than drawing something that's wrong and then assuming that it's correct. Right? There are guidelines, and nobody understands that, especially when you're drawing in the world of 3D, so you can use it in the prefabrication space within the context of your project. You need to understand how a project goes together to draw it, and draw it appropriately. So
that's a good segue to what we're going to do today. So when Kip and I were planning this live stream out, Kip said to me, "I don't want to know what you want to ask me." He said, "Just come up with 10 ideas that are misconceptions about construction technology, and we'll run with that."
I'm a brave man, right?
You are a brave man.
That is an absolute roll. That's an absolute roll of the dice here. So
given that I'm a bit of a research junkie, it started to get me thinking about all the different things that we'll be debunking today in technology. And as far as, when you start really thinking about it, there's technology and for the sake of technology. Those are questions in and of themselves. And then there's obviously the people that use it. And then there's also the context in which technology lies. So, no technology functions in and of itself. So, it's really vital that we start to open up this, I'm going to call it for the moment, a can of worms, and really understand the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. So I've put together 10 ideas, and we're just going to let Kip run on what it is that he thinks are myths and truths about certain things that happen with technology. I think that some people may be having some trouble, as far as I can see in the comments, either hearing or knowing that we're live. As far as I know, technology should be working on my end. And at this point, I'm not able to check it, but believe me, if anybody, for whatever reason, can't hear well enough or isn't able to access the live stream, I will be following up with everybody that took the time to register, because we're grateful that you registered and came on and are interested in the topic. It's certainly more than a 3D topic. Let's say that. So let's get started, Kip. And what I want to do is sort of make sure that we are talking about the things that are going to lead us into this kind of conversation. So I thought we'd start off with BIM, because it's now a term that's thrown around a lot. So with your 30 years of experience, what have you witnessed in terms of the evolution of BIM? You talked a little bit about QuickPen earlier on, and how have you seen BIM go beyond the 3D model to, the sort of comprehensive process that it is now?
Yeah, it's building information modeling. I think the first phrase it was probably used back in the 90s, 92, 93, somewhere around there. There's some mention of it, and so forth, and it really began to involve much far probably in the late 90s, early 2000, when certainly when AutoCAD bought Revit. Navisworks came on to Navisworks had come across the pond, so to speak. And of course, eventually Autodesk acquired Navisworks. And one of the very first, I think one of the very first major papers on the concept of BIM was done by a company called View by View, 2004, 2005, in that period of time. And I think it was for the Letterman Digital Arts Center in California. And it was actually done by a customer of ours. At that time, we had an application that drew in 3D called Pipe Designer 3D. And it was a parametric driven 3D modeling tool that sat on top of AutoCAD and allowed you to do, ISO drawings for prefabrication and so forth and so on. And then that's where the idea was, back in those early days that as construction professionals, we think in 3D, right? Yep. So why not draw in 3D? Very few people look at the floor and say, well, this is how I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go this way and that way, and they forget and don't worry about the elevation change. They say, well, I got to go here and I got to go up and then I got to go over kind of function. So why not draw on that methodology, especially if you're going to do prefabrication and that kind of function? So that was kind of one of the very first. It's a really great white paper. It's still out there. You can still read it. The thing I find interesting about it is most of the white papers written today around the concept of BIM focus on a perception that somebody already knows what it is.
Well, let's get into it. Because I think it's really important to decipher. We were talking a little bit earlier about, BIM information modeling versus management. And what does that look like?
So building information modeling, there's two major acronyms in this process. And understand, that's what BIM is. It's a process. It's not a thing, right? And that's building information. BIM also stands for building information management as well as building information modeling, right? And then there's LOD. LOD stands for both the level of detail as well as level of development. Now, the way that differentiate those is BIM, the BIM modeling aspect, the actual BIM model is the 3D information that is created using a multitude of various platforms where I can put in true parametric information and so forth. So I can coordinate, the spatial requirements within the context of a building to ensure that everything fits, right? That's the basics of a BIM model, right? It can go deeper than that. Building information management is taking that model then and adding additional information, even potentially IoT devices and other things, so that now becomes a tool that not only can I see my building in a living, breathing 3D document, but I can also potentially manage various aspects of the building and so forth.
Well, I think the image that I've put up, though, it really does speak to the fact that, yes, you've given some good examples, but it really is a holistic way to hold all the data points that you have about a particular structure.
Yeah, it's a singular source of digital truth. It'd be another way to place it, right?
Yeah.
It's a holistically layered view of the interworkings of my structure, my building, certainly the major systems within the context of that building, the mechanical, electrical, and so forth, right? And then you could flag and tag other, external information within that model, say PDF documentation to how do I change the filter and all that other kind of stuff if you want to provide that information to your maintenance teams. Level of detail and level of development. Level of detail, basically, in its nutshell, is basically talking about, there's various levels of LOD, 100, 200, 300, 350, 400, and 500. How does something look? Does it look like a box or does it look like a valve, right? And then does that box, as you go through the various levels of detail, that you'll see that interaction change within that function, right? And so that it becomes more and more to look like a true valve, and potentially even a valve potentially even sourced by the manufacturer, even.
Now that's interesting, because I always thought the levels related to also who had input into the model.
Well, so you've got level of development and you've got level of detail. Detail is basically, what do things look like, right? And there are some other size criteria too. For example, at an LOD 200, I'm probably not going to draw anything, smaller than 2 inches to an inch, right? Depending on who's drawing it and what they're drawing. If I get to an LOD 400, 500, I'm going to draw pretty much everything, right? Including the 1/4 inch airline, right? That kind of function. And so level of development, where detail kind of focuses mainly on the visual side. In my opinion, the level of development will be, what does that information, what can it tell me about that particular item? Its manufacturer, other smart context and metadata, for the lack of a better phrase, that can potentially be inputted, in the tree of all the various elements within the model. So development is basically, detail is what does it look like, and basically development was kind of like saying, what can it tell me? Right.
Patrick is saying building, including
modeling.
Which is really,
I've known Pat for a long time. He's an amazing talent when it comes to this. He's a living, breathing example. When I said earlier, if you want to find a good draftsman, go find a skilled tradesman. He's a living, breathing epitome of that. So.
Well, but I do think what you said at the top of this, again, technology is made by people, and it's made by people for people. It's not something that just exists for the sake of it, obviously. And if you don't have good people designing it, let alone using it, because they understand the context of what they're using, you don't give a power tool to, a chef. I mean, unless they want to puree something in a very crude way, it's just not the same. So
and look, there are some amazing companies out there that provides these things as BIM as a service, right? And more and more beginning to hire industry level people, and some aren't. Once again, it all comes down to need, right? Are you just modeling it for coordination, or are you going to do something with that model to try to garner some additional productivity and time, right? And that's where the real benefit of I think BIM is. Just using it for coordination, you'll probably never get your money out of it, right?
So here's a segue for you. So let's talk about the things that really start to build out the model. And so that next idea is digital twins. So they're often misunderstood as a simple 3D model. Can you share an example of?
Well, I think, look, I might say that, truly, a true BIM model that has gone to an LOD, especially a 400 or 500 model, right, where I'm dealing with true as-built conditions. It now represents the actual physical structure. It actually, the MEP systems, the major mechanical, electrical, piping, and plumbing systems in the building are accurate in relationship to install, right? And all this is done in a building in a BIM model is certainly, because you can input IoT devices and other things into that, to monitor certain functions, and that's been done for a period of time, is a form of digital twin, right? Not all digital twin require reality capture devices such as laser scanning or whatever the case may be. So the concept of digital twin has actually been around a while. Digital twin is now the new buzz phrase, and that kind of function. But digital twins are a much broader topic, and are used across a multitude of industries where BIM really is a construction-based tool, right? You're not very it's not used much out of construction. I don't think it's used anywhere out of construction other than in building. Digital twins are used across a multitude of industries. They're used in the world of on-time manufacturing. They're used in reverse engineering. Those kind of functions. So there's lots of digital twins out there. But in the phrase of construction, a digital twin, once again, needs to come back to being that living, breathing documentation. It's not as simply as just scanning. Hey, I scanned a rock, right, and I created a digital twin. No, you created a copy of a rock. So if you want to
let's talk about the substantial impact that using and applying this concept of the digital twin in or out of laser technology.
Well, digital twin, Michael Greaves was one of the very first people that coined the phrase digital twin, and he used it a lot in PLM manufacturing, right? And the idea was to improve. For example, we have a customer that works in the automotive industry.
Yeah.
They're an auto manufacturer. They have about 28 facilities across the globe. Now they do full digital twins of all their facilities. I mean, we are literally holding a full digital replication of their entire facility to sub-millimeter accuracy, right? And from that, they monitor things. They have IoT devices into the facility so that they can monitor and they can actually interact. Inside that digital twin, they can say, well, what if we did this, and run various simulations and analysis. And in some instances, it's cut their engineering time by 30 or 40% when they turn around and they say, well, what if we take this inline manufacturing line and we do this with it? They can do all that in a digital space without losing productivity by having to tear the line down. And that's
yeah,
right. So if you take that premise, right, that idea, and then move it out into construction, right, now I'm dealing with, taking that digital twin being the final result. Once again, I believe digital twin is more of a process than it is an actual thing. Take that digital twin process and move it out that you're now creating, where before we were giving a 3D model, maybe a CAD or Revit style model, or I guess a Navisworks model potentially, because that's traditionally how those things are democratized, to an owner at turnover. In this instance, you're now going to be able to, you're going to give them not just that model, but you're also going to give them the physical reality capture of their actual physical structure, right? So the reality capture side, whether it be photos, whether it be a concept of terrestrial laser scanning, obviously drone-based captures, the various reality capture tools are out there, have now become part and parcel of the context and the content within the digital twin space. Now, I for a period of time, I've argued, at least internally, right, that there's various levels of digital twins. So just like now in BIM, we have the various LODs, the 100 to 200, 300, 350, right, 400, 500. Yeah. I think that needs to occur inside the digital twin umbrella. And what I mean by that is the various reality capture technologies all have a certain LOA or level of accuracy associated with them. And then the need that the customer has, it determines what is the acceptable mean error that I'm willing to accept, right? So if I can live with a 1/4 inch or higher, then I could probably get away with using SLAM or mobile mapping, right? If I really need that high accuracy, I'm going to have to do a terrestrial laser scan, commonly in the Faro world, a Faro Focus, right? Or a combination of both. And so if I look at that, I say, okay, if I look at 360 photos, that's a visual tool. That's all it'll ever be. 360 photos are all they're going to be is about seeing it. They're not about measuring it. It's about seeing it. That's more of a visual twin. And then a mobile mapping is about the space, right? It's not about the individual components defined within that space. It's about the space. That may be a spatial twin. All right. And then constructible twin is where I'm using terrestrial terrestrial laser scanning to get a high dense point cloud that I can do for support my fabrication and prefabrication efforts. So I've been saying this for about 2 years now. Visual twin, spatial twin, constructible twin, and hoping that the industry that we begin to matriculate the concept that we have a digital twin umbrella, just like we have a BIM umbrella, and then underneath that, the various tools and how they're actually used within the space.
So here's a side question for you. So, I mean, yes, I understand, and I'm sure the audience, in more than me in varying degrees, understands the actual applications that they've applied. But when you're talking about general contractors and your average kind of project, is there a specific size of project and type of project that you've seen this serve better than not? Or, as Patrick said, it's used everywhere. So
it's used, digital twins, like I said, digital twins are used across a multitude of industries, right? They are used in everything, like, Pat says, they're using everything from agriculture, right? I remember I met a guy on a plane who worked for the USDA. And he was talking about the digitization that they had to do in the agriculture space, because understanding the population growth that was occurring, certainly in North America, they had to increase the protein per acre. And so they had to survey all these agricultural plots and looking at what are ways that we could increase the protein per acre. Could we change some things? What kind of, and then also digitizing, infectious involvement of various diseases and that kind of thing that exist in the world of agriculture and forestry and so forth,
which is becoming more and more and more and more.
Right. And so and so the concept of digital twin is being used in the forestry service. They're going and using mobile mapping to scan forests to look for fuel on the ground. How do we deforest to prevent wildfires? Because obviously that's a huge problem right now. So
how about let's take it back to construction?
But I'm just saying, but digital twins is a very broad topic, right? But in construction, right now, I would say, digital twin is still in its infancy. I think we're still finding our way, right? So I'm not going to sit. I don't think I could sit here and say this is the project where it's going to be used. Mm-hmm. I think in manufacturing, certainly in the world of mega projects, I believe like the Sphere in Vegas is a prime example. I think the ability to analyze the data and so forth. I don't think that building could have been built without a laser scanner, in all honesty. And so I think we're in our infancy right now with the concept. It is a great phrase and everybody loves it. But we as an industry we're just dipping our toe in the water.
Well, that's fine.
It's going to explode. Don't get me wrong. It's going to explode, right? And I think it's going to become contractually obligated down the road. Once the tools get to a point that they're more easily accessible and more easily attainable and more easily used.
So talk a little bit about why they're not. What is?
Well, you think about, right now, of course, one of the things that we're working on at Faro very diligently is trying to, right now, most people that work in this environment are working in they might have a multitude of platforms that they're working with and or on, right? And they could have 4 or 5 different windows open trying to access data from very siloed context, because they've got one application over here that does this and another application over here that does that, and they've got to transpose information between A and B, and maybe those two companies right now don't necessarily talk to each other, or they have dissimilar data styles, that kind of function. And so one of the things that we're trying to find is a way to speed this up, is to get people into a singular based platform so that they can look across for example, in our world, the reality capture spectrum, I can look at my 360 photos, my BIM applications, even if it was drawn by somebody else, right? And my terrestrial LiDAR scanning, laser scanning, certainly if it's created by our applications, but even if it was created by somebody else. And so that I can go to at least to have that visualization. For us, it's a program called Sphere XG, but it's a visualization tool that allows you to coalesce all the various reality capture functions and your BIM model into a singular platform, so that I can not jump across 4 or 5, and then democratize that, very, very easily.
I can't tell you.
That's what I mean. That access is the key
right.
The
because
key
of the
word
fragmented nature of construction technology and the tasks that align or misalign with those technologies.
The technologies have been very siloed over the years, right?
Yes.
All of us that have worked in the world of technology have gone like this, right? We run around with our arms saying, "Oh, you can't see my data. I'm not going to show you my data," right? That kind of thing. And then we're like, I think, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Those days are over, right? If we, as technology companies, we have to go like this, right? Because if we just go like this, then the only people we're going to be hugging is ourselves.
I agree. So this is a good segue into the next myth. I want to talk a little bit about the Internet of Things, which of course blows wide open the basic concept that you're talking about. So, in terms of LOT and IoT in construction involving networks of physical devices that embed with sensors and software. Can you share some commercial examples of integrations that are driving the Internet of Things that maybe will be a tipping point?
Well, I think one of the very first things out of the gate that IoT devices being actively used in construction projects in the world of safety, right? There are active IoT devices on every job site now, looking for people that don't wear hard hats, right? Those kind of functions. And I see more and more IoT devices becoming part and parcel of the install within the major systems within a building. And that's where once again, you're going to go back to that digital twin phrase, so that if I for example, I've spent a lot of time at the Oracle Innovation Lab in Chicago, right? Mm-hmm. They have a mock apartment up in that building, and they have some IoT devices and so forth in like the appliances within that building that provide immediate feedback to a system that allows you to determine, how is this refrigerator, how much power is this using, and can we improve on the consumption of all these functions within this particular apartment, and so they're constantly being monitored, and I see that becoming more and more part and parcel of our day-to-day lives. Look, many of us have an Alexa. Many of us have those kind of devices in our homes. Obviously, those are IoT devices, and they're of their own right.
Right. Yeah.
And they're constantly, I don't know about you, but they're constantly listening.
Yes, they are.
I don't know how many times, I don't know how many times I say, boy, those purple socks look nice. And next thing I know, I'm getting advertisements for companies that make purple socks. And your phone is an IoT device.
Dang right.
So these things are not new, right? They're now part and parcel into our everyday lives.
But this is part of the myth, though. This is a part of the myth.
The myth is
they're already in it.
Yeah.
They're already in the ecosystem and the echo chamber.
The myth is that these things are new, right? That's the myth. The myth is they're everyday devices now, that we don't even. I'll give you another example. Probably one of the closest things to a digital twin that actively the average consumer acts with every single solitary day, if they own one, is a Tesla, right? Because I get inside my Tesla, I am now inside an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right. And then I got a picture of my car. And inside that car is a picture of my car. And on the picture of that car, it shows me all the sensors around that car. So I can see everything around that car. And then as I press the gas, I can see the input of my foot on the gas and how it affects the engine and the wheels and everything else. I can see that the minute I touch that gas, what occurs, right? That's what a true digital twin does. It's not only the concept of seeing the car, it's also seeing the result of my interaction within that context of that device, right? And so probably that's one of the best analogies I can give of what a digital twin is in context.
Yeah.
From a consumer standpoint. Now expand that to a building, right? You've got the IoT devices that says, once I open up this air handling unit, I can see the release of the pressure on the system, right? And so therefore, I've got IoT devices now that are determining, okay, what is my acceptable pressure drop, right? If my filters start to go bad, right? And then I can see, well, if I put in a new filter, how much is it going to improve? But what's the cost of bringing in that new filter? Blah, 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 right? And so those IoT devices, they're out there. They're part and parcel of a thing. And in all honesty, they're everywhere. And
they are, but people tend to think of this as only being a connection, and it's so much more.
No, this is an informational highway.
Yes.
It's like, there's an old phrase, data's the new oil, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I can't take raw crude oil and go put it in my car and go anywhere, right? That oil has to be refined into something that is usable. And that's the exact same thing that exists in the data that we're talking about right now, right? All this raw data has to be refined, right? And through the various applications and software vendors and so forth, where we're taking this data, right? Taking the data from the IoT devices, and we're refining in such a way that that data now becomes usable and consumable. So.
And it's sort of a little bit related to Patrick's statement. Basically, when the client isn't involved, and you have to really bring it back to the consumer, who's consuming the data and for what purpose, and
right.
That it all comes down to that.
It all comes back to need, right?
Yeah,
I always make this joke about this teeter-totter that exists in the world of reality capture. And on one side of the teeter-totter is speed, and the other side of the reality capture, right, is time, right? And I can be really accurate, but it's going to take more time. But I can really fast, but I'm going to lose some accuracy. But I see, through manufacturing, like right now, we're down to 28-second color scans, right? Only 28 seconds per scan. So we're compressing that and moving that reality capture more towards the fulcrum. So the differential between that isn't as vast, right? So now it comes down to speed versus need, right? When do I need it? Because many of these applications have cloud-based processing, so I may not have access to it right away, right? I may have to wait an hour, or till the black box does its magic, and then it kicks it back to me, right? So if my need is such that I have to consume it right away, then I might go a different direction and spend a little more time, right? If I don't need it right away, then I'm just going to collect it, push it to the cloud, and I'll wait till it gets back to me.
Well, it's funny because you kind of covered the cloud, right? Because I was going to say it's often misunderstood as only being online storage, but contextualizing how it actually moves your data and what's happening with it in the cloud is, to me, helpful for the planning of what tools you use and how you use them.
Yeah, well, you remember, like when I mentioned about the data refinement function, right? About the data, having to be refined in a way that makes it usable and consumable, right? And cloud, used to be cloud was all about mainly just storage, right? When people thought about cloud, they thought about Box, or they thought about OneDrive, or they thought about the various other cloud-based applications.
Or I don't need to have hardware on my premises anymore.
Yeah, well, I'm also a firm believer there's no such thing as redundant backup, right? And there's nothing worse than having a hard drive in a fire safe and having the building burnt down, and then you realize your hard drive's useless because the heat warped it, right? So there's no such thing as redundant backup, and especially of integral data. So cloud traditionally was all about just storage, moving stuff from physical point A to a cloud-based point B, so that I knew that I had some redundancy out there should something, bad really happen.
And it does. And it does. It
It happens every day,
happens
right?
every day. Yes.
So that is still an integral part, right? And there's some amazing companies out there that are working. I think, like Ignite. If you heard of a company called Ignite,
Yeah.
amazing company from the world of cloud storage. But now what you're seeing is companies now certainly through the advent of AI, now extrapolating information from cloud storage so that you could actually physically work in that cloud environment. And then, a prime example is in a conference, and they had a guy, and he was a photographer, and mainly in the world of wildlife, and he would sit for months, waiting for the perfect shot, right? Just thousands and thousands and thousands of photos, and then they would have to upload it to his editor, that kind of thing, right? And then they literally were manually going through and saying cow, chicken, horse, cow, chicken, horse, right? And separating all those thousands of photos into buckets.
Right on. Yeah.
So what they then started, I believe they were using one of the AI tools. I think it might have been Watson. I don't remember exactly which one it was, to go in and interpolate that. And they could do in a day that would normally take them 3 or 4 months, using AI, and just created a whole new avenue of the use of the cloud, not only for storage, but production. And more companies now are beginning to use the cloud and posting up, very intricate driven analytics and applications, so that I don't have to do it myself. And now there's a little bit of a black box function that goes on there. Black box is commonly referred to as, I don't know what's going on, but I have to accept the result.
Well,
and
sometimes cloud server farms are not in countries where you would think, you'd want to be dealing with.
Well, there's a lot of, you're right. There's a big push.
Yeah.
There's a big push for many, certainly within certain industries for sure. There is a big push to have, quote, on soil. We commonly call it on soil storage, right? In other words, if I'm working in the country of Saudi Arabia, they want their cloud storage to be, quote, on Saudi Arabian soil. Certainly within certain infrastructures, and I completely understand that. But even you think about the world of reality capture. In the world of reality capture, you have a traditional process: is you collect, you register, you consume. Right? That's the basic premise.
Right.
But the registration process, typically, it's a 1-to-1 ratio for most people. If I scan for an hour, I got to register for an hour. Right? There's one way to think about it. And through cloud processing now, for example, our new mobile scanner, we have the ability to capture it, press a button, send it to the cloud. I don't have to touch it until it kicks it back to me an hour and a half later, and then I've got a point cloud that's ready to consume.
Yeah, but again, the cloud is one of those terms, Kip, that we all throw around.
Yeah,
and I don't think enough people understand
cloud
the context of it.
It's storage, right?
Yeah.
It's storage. It's posting up. It's posting up on machines that is not with processing power that is not available to you and I, right? The crunching of numbers, analytics, data. More and more applications now are actually physically computing, right? And the cloud traditionally was cloud storage, but now it's well beyond that. It is cloud computing, it is cloud processing, it is cloud storage. It's all part of the quote cloud, right? The idea of virtual machines and so forth and so on. When you're seeing these large farms coming up, that's what it is. So that applications like us and others can develop applications to improve the time, productivity, and accuracy of our clients by providing them access to superior computing processing that's not available to the normal consumer.
I want to talk a little bit about AR versus VR. Again, I think those are two concepts that tend to rub up, and people maybe sometimes use them interchangeably.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people think they're the same thing,
Yeah.
right? And there's even a third one called XR, right? And so AR is augmented reality, right? The way to think about that would be as if I'm looking at your building, I could use augmented reality to bring the BIM model in, so I could actually physically see the building through the glasses along with the BIM model, right? So I'm looking at both the real world and, quote, a virtual.
Which
That's
somewhat sounds like
right,
a digital twin.
right, and an
Yeah.
augmented reality type scenario, right?
Yeah.
Um, um, I I waffle on use case here.
Okay. Tell us why.
I think I think it's great for visualization, but not so much for interaction. Um, and so forth. Once again, I still think we're in its. I still think even though it's not necessarily a new technology, we're still relatively in its infancy, and the hardware itself is I think expensive, right? Virtual reality is literally immersing myself into a digital version of that environment. Once again, a true digital twin, right? Or even doesn't necessarily have to be a digital twin. It could be just a scan of a building and so forth. Now, there's some great tools in VR. The great thing about VR, I feel, is things that look good on a BIM model may not look good in the scan. Your visual acuity changes, and you can interact a little bit easier, I believe, in a VR space. Of course, this is all ebb and flow. But so virtual reality is actually physically working within, in the space, but that's now becoming, of course, you got the whole metaverse now thing, which is basically, Facebook's version of the metaverse, which is now we're going to create this whole new, alternate reality kind of function.
I did another live stream with one of the tools in the VR space, VREX.
VREX, yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
I partner, been around VREX. I think they're out of Norway, right?
That's right. That's correct. Yep.
And the way, that's kind of like a Zoom call in VR is the way I kind of look at it, right?
He did a terrific live stream where he actually did a great demo, actually, putting us in the environment
and
of one of
we've
their
done
projects.
we've done some work with them at the Oracle Lab, with the team at VREX, and they've used some of our scan data, and so forth as part and parcel of that, quote, virtual reality Zoom meeting. I love the interactive environment within the VREX tools, and the ability that we can all coalesce together and jump and warp. Yeah. I mean, I really think, to me, I find VR more usable
That's
and
why
contextual than AR, right? Yep. That's just my opinion. XR is extended reality, where now I can actually physically not just see the environment but feel the environment. For example, I went to a conference in Texas, AR, VR, XR conference. And, of course, now in the world of XR, that's used a lot in the training industry, certainly within military and construction. XR is, where I'm put on a set of VR goggles, and then I'm on a physical platform that looks like the platform that you'd used for like a JLG, like a man lift. But as you're moving the physical device, you're looking at in virtual reality and manipulating a virtual reality man lift by moving physical knobs, right? So it's a combination of being in a virtual reality but working in a physical environment with your hands. And then what you're doing in the physical environment is actually interacting with the digital environment, and it's a training tool, so that if I break something, I'm not really breaking something, right? And it's all about, and then you're creating muscle memory, right, and that kind of function.
But the use cases are just infinite.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They really are. They're infinite, which then, for the sake of time today, will segue into drones versus UAVs, so unmanned aerial vehicles. Often they're two interchangeable ideas. And I just want to know, have you come across any sort of commercial applications for either or? And just as you gave us in the AR VR example, one better over the other?
Well, there's all kinds of different sensors that can be used on a drone, right? And each one has its own potential use case. Um, Traditionally, drones have been always been thought about as an external function, right? Once again, here you're showing like an agricultural plot, for example.
Right.
Great use case for a drone. Looking for example, water. Where's ponding and that kind of function, right? Obviously, forestry is an amazing use case for drone footage, right?
Interrupting the
And
digital
you know,
twin comment.
yeah,
By
and
Patrick.
that kind of function. But probably one of the more upcoming uses I see of drones right now is internal. There's a number of companies that are now creating drones specifically designed to fly inside buildings, to use combination of photogrammetry and AI to potentially do visual inspections within at timed increments, or even for example, a company called Flyability. Flyability creates this caged looking drone. It's like a wired ball, and with a drone inside of it.
Yeah.
And you can fly it inside like mines and tunnels and all this. And it's made to bump into stuff.
Wow,
Um,
that's
so
amazing.
so that you can fly it in internal like tunnels and structures and so forth and so on, because there are areas that exist. And you think about, even we'll use Spot the Robot Dog as an example. Right now, I've got a Spot the Robot Dog, and we had one before it was commercially available because we married our scanner to it. But that's just a ground-based drone. That's all a Spot the Robot Dog is. It's a ground-based drone. It's not, yes, it's a robotic dog, but it's a ground-based drone. Is a way to think about it. And I think the use cases for interior drones like that, whether they're ground-based or aerial, in the worlds of hazardous conditions,
You think
confined space,
wastewater, right?
high
Wastewater,
voltage,
sewage,
mining, tunnels.
mining. Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
the
Yes.
goal, for me, the prime source and prime goal of any of those applications is to make sure that the guy in the field goes home to his family. That's the primary use case, right? Because all it takes is one at-loss accident, and that drone became really, 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 really cheap.
Right on.
And
But think
and
about
and
how many disasters, Kip, have happened pre these inventions that should now really be used at scale
yeah,
and
and
become mandatory.
I hope so, right? I mean, obviously, OSHA and other government bodies are going to weigh in on all this kind of stuff, and certainly the FAA, and probably obviously not internally, but but the ability to use these kind of tools to mitigate, and I think all these tools. And I remember you and I talked one time about job replacement, and are these everybody's concerned about a robot's going to take my job kind of function, and I think we'll probably cover that maybe at a later date.
We
But
might just close up with that, actually.
yeah, but
Our other ones. I did want to get into the API. Sorry to interrupt you. What would you rather do? Would you rather kind of riff on the job?
Well, I think we're already here. Let's just stay here, and then maybe we'll
Yeah.
do a part 2, and we can come back to the ones we missed, right?
Yes.
Because we're coming up against our time window.
Yes,
but
we are.
All these tools, everything that I've mentioned today, right? They aren't about replacing anybody's job. They are all about augmenting people's jobs. It is about taking an existing, the terrible phrase that everybody says, we've always done it that way, and moving it in such a way that all these tools are all about time, productivity, and accuracy. That's what all these tools are about. And the use of robotics, the use of drones, the use of all these, reality capture isn't about replacing somebody's job. It's about making your job easier and better, so we end up with a better result. And making sure that people go home safely, and all these. It's about augmenting our everyday work. It is not about replacing anybody's job. And because if we can do things better, if we can do things faster, if we can do things more accurately, if we can do things more efficiently, then we can put more people to work, not less. And
if I can just jump in here and weigh on, sort of be the devil's advocate in that, it's not about the job replacement. I think too much technology, particularly in construction, came out of the box, not contextualizing and understanding the workflows of how that technology would be used. Faro is one of those larger companies that very much specialized in what they did and grew out of those experiences. But with a lot of people that jump in the boat in Contech, they don't have enough experience. And that's why when Shelley Armato came on today and she, was talking about the fact that, technology needs to be only one click, there's a big gap between what you do and unfortunately what some mediocre apps do.
Well, I think everybody wants to improve. When you create something, it's because you came a great idea. And I always use the example of anybody that's ever been to Autodesk University, and it's Nerdvana, right? And what I typically see is a bunch of I always use the analogy of the little boy blue at the dike, right? And he sees a problem, he sees a hole, and so he sticks his finger in the hole, and he solved that problem. But now he can't move his finger. In the early days, none of us could move our finger because we were still worried about that one little problem, and there was 5 other problems popping up down the dam. But I couldn't do anything about those because I was too worried about my little problem here. And so what happens is when you push it all back, we're all trying to solve the same problem, right? We're just and so when somebody says, "I just want to press a button and get an answer," that means that I made decisions for you on your behalf that potentially you didn't want me to make, because construction is one of the most complex environments. Anybody that thinks construction is easy is lying. Anybody that says construction contractors are making a fortune is lying. There's probably 12 that are struggling for the one that isn't. The average construction profitability on a project is less than 8%. And so they don't have anything that they can do to mitigate the encroachment into their profitability they need to do. And they're going to spend time and effort to do it. And if I just make a decision for you, that decision may or may not be part, for the lack of a better phrase, culturally relevant to your company. And so I believe all these applications, even though they are tools, that's all they are. They are wrenches and screwdrivers.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yep.
And it is about developing a toolkit for your company, because the most expensive tool is the one you don't have. And so, anybody that thinks that I'm going to just press a button and solve all your ills is lying to you. And so, but what it does require is finding people that can be trusted advisors to help organizations adapt and implement.
But it's also what you did probably, 20 minutes into the call, where you said any technology company that thinks they're going to grow by doing this versus being open is what's going to move these tools along and apply them in the right way to the right people at the right time, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, because 90% of all failures in implementation in technologies revolves around one word: education. And and so we have to educate ourselves as an environment, as an industry. Pat Ramirez, for example, has been on kind enough been on the call today. He was an educator, in the piping trades for years. There's guys like him out there, and it's paramount to us to take that industry knowledge and use it in a tangible way. I gave a speech a while back, and I said one thing: knowledge versus wisdom, right? And I brought up a picture of a tomato, and I asked everybody, I said, "What's this?" Right? And everybody said, "It's a tomato." I said, "Yeah, but what is it?" And they said, "Well, it's a fruit." I said, "Exactly. Knowledge is knowing tomatoes are fruit." And then I brought up a picture of fruit salad, and I said, but wisdom is knowing you don't put it in fruit salad, right? And so I think right now we have a tendency in the technology space, guys like me, unfortunately, have a tendency to go out and regurgitate knowledge, and so forth. But really what the industry needs more from people like us, and your platform is providing that, is hopefully, right, imparting some wisdom, and talking about things in a real competent manner, outside of the sales world, and because opinions are great, especially if they're valid. So.
Well, and they're valid and they're usable. And what I've learned over the, several years of doing this is that it's certainly not one size fits all.
No.
And it's not either a yes or a no. The answers are in the gray area.
Yeah, and there's always a, when you think about construction. Remember in the movie, I think it was Armageddon, when he said, "Can you believe we're in a rocket with 3 million gallons of liquid oxygen about ready to explode, in a rocket built by the lowest bidder," right? And there was a push, there was a movement for a while in construction to throw out the low bid and the high bid, because in all honesty, 90% of all bids, the truth is probably in the middle, right? The guy that's in the middle probably has the job right. The guy that's really low potentially probably missed something, or he needs the really job bad, so he's going to cut some, be cutting some corners. The guy that's really, really high looked at it wrong, or really doesn't want it, right? So the guy in the middle probably is the one that really has the bid right. And so there was a movement in a while back, and I don't know, I've been out of the estimating world for a long time, but to take the guy in the middle, and not necessarily automatically take the low bid. And when you think about that, it's just like my opinions here today. These are my opinions, right? This is stuff that
your opinions are based on your experience, Kip.
They're based on my experience, right? They're based on what I know. They're based on 40 years in this space, right? But my opinions, you could have a difference in opinion, and that's fantastic, because that itself is how an industry moves forward, right? It is through the conversation that industry moves forward. And that's all I hope to do by doing these kind of events, is to continue the conversation. Well,
let's continue the conversation. My hat's off to you for all that you left on the table today. And I think it's really important that we keep these conversations going. We didn't even hit as many questions as I could have lobbed at you, obviously.
Well, the minute you get on, the minute you start talking with me, it's the concept of time is purely.
Well, let's get another date on the calendar, and continue, ripping and stripping all these ideas, because they are interconnected, and they are, there is complexity around these decisions. There's just no two ways around it.
It's an amazing time to be in this industry. It truly is. So
it is. And those of us that know that have to encourage those that maybe don't see it. And that's also a part of my mission. And I know it's a part of your mission every day. And with that, Kip, we're going to call it a wrap. I want to thank everybody that took their time to tune in live. Of course, this will be a recording in other places, and we will make sure that we continue this conversation, not just in this context, but with other things that we'll be handing out and sharing after the fact. So thank you again, everybody. And that's a wrap.
Thanks for your time, Stephanie.
Thank you, Kip.
Bye.
Bye-bye.